Greetings and hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. My name is Lainey Rose, and I'm the events manager here at City Bookshop. Don't be shy. We have some chairs open in the front row right here for you. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Come on down. Just to show of hands, who all is at the store for the first time? Oh, very nice. A nice little new crowd. Well, welcome, welcome. And welcome to our virtual audience. If you are tuning in that way, we're very excited to have you all with us as well. Our summer calendar is in full swing at the shop, and we've got a little something on our calendar for everyone, from our kiddos to our romance lovers to our fiction lovers to our next nonfiction event, which will be on July 9th, as Dr. Kathleen Smith discusses her book, True to You, A Guide to the Theory and Practice of Creating Authentic Relationships. All the information about how to sign up for our events or one of our 14 book clubs, yes, 14 book clubs, is on our website. Before we get to tonight's event, some housekeeping details. Number one, if you could take a moment to silence your cell phones, we would appreciate it. Number two, if you need a restroom, it's upstairs past the cash registers and the greeting cards. Number three, we will have time for questions tonight for both in-person and virtual attendees. So even if you're watching via Zoom, you can participate. Please put those questions in the Q&A feature so that we can see them and can ask on your behalf. And finally, most importantly, if you still need to purchase a copy of Decluttered, we have copies available upstairs at the register, and we'd be happy to help you out with that. And now the reason we're here. Decluttered, Mindful Organizing for Health, Home, and Beyond is a mindful exploration of how and why clutter manifests in our lives and what we can do about it. Jenny Albertini invites readers to explore decluttering from a personal and empathetic angle while acknowledging how clutter does not only manifest as stuff in our homes, but also in our relationships and in our everyday lives. Decluttered helps reduce shame and supports readers to transform their cluttered lives and spaces into foundations for healthy, balanced, and intentional living. Welcome to your world, Decluttered. Our author of the evening is Jenny Albertini, who has been organizing in health systems and closets around the world for more than 2 decades. She trained under Marie Kondo and became one of her first KonMari consultants, where she focused on finding joy within piles of clutter. Jenny has been featured on PBS, NBC, in the Washington Post, Apartment Therapy, and many other media outlets. Recognized for her work fighting the AIDS epidemic while waging war on clutter, she has found a unique way to infuse public health into the professional organizing field. Joining her in conversation, Christine Platt is a multi-genre author who has carved a unique path in the worlds of lifestyle, literature, and media. Christine is a member of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, Association of Black Women Historians, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. She currently serves as the executive director for Jacqueline Woodson's nonprofit residency for artists of the global majority, Baldwin for the Arts. And now please welcome our authors of the evening.
All right, we're live.
This sounds on, I think. Yeah.
Hey, Jenny.
Hi, Christine.
Should we tell the folks how we met?
Seems like a good place to start.
Back when Instagram did what Instagram was supposed to do, right? So everyone, I'm Christine Platt, and I first met Jenny on Instagram. I was cultivating my little Afro minimalist life, and it was just a beautiful community, I think, of tiny home dwellers, folks who were very much committed to the practice of minimalism rather than the aesthetics of minimalism. And we just sort of connected through that community. And then I wrote the Afro Minimalist Guide to Living with Less, and it became one of your clients' sort of favorite books.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you know that because the reason we met on Instagram is because I read the apartment therapy story about your apartment. And so then I followed you. And then I noticed that we were going to the same in-person women's group in Georgetown.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I need to meet this woman. And there we go.
And then here we are.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just been beautiful watching your journey. And I think it's so beautiful to think about how our work intersects. Because when we first met, neither one of us had books, which is kind of crazy to think about. One of the things I think it's important to start with is the angle of your book. I guess Jenny and I connecting through the practice of minimalism really centered on the fact that we weren't focused on the aesthetics, right? And so I love that this book took a public health approach. For those of you who have the book or who are listening online, I'm on page 5. And you say, my goal is to provide context around why different types of clutter affect all areas of our lives, our health, our homes, and our personal and professional goals, the latter of which I will refer to as the beyond throughout the book. I believe we can take steps to alleviate the harm clutter causes by using a public health approach, which involves defining and measuring the problem, determining the cause or risk factors for the problem, figuring out how to prevent or mitigate the problem, implementing effective strategies on a larger scale, and evaluating the impacts of those strategies. Let me tell you, I read that, and then I was so glad the next sentence said, don't worry though, no PhD needed here. So tell us how, I think it's beautiful to start with how your public health work intersects with this book and your approach to minimalism and decluttering, rather.
Yeah. Boy, you really picked one of the wordiest sentences I've seen of the book.
So I love it.
But it's in there because it matters to me.
Yeah.
And, having studied and worked in public health for 2 decades, and for those who aren't familiar with it, public health is really the science and practice of protecting and improving the well-being for people and communities. And it can take many different shapes and work in many different industries. So for the book, when I first started writing it, I was like, how do I bring that into the effect that clutter has on people and their families and our broader situations? And I initially started outlining the book along these 3 principles that I've used for a lot of public health work, which are looking at biological, behavioral, and structural components that create any kind of problem or health condition for people. And so I really wrote into those things, and you'll see them come up in the book. So biological issues are a lot of the brain-based conditions that I talk about for the book. Behavioral have to do with the relationships that we're all in. And, even just an in-law that's sending you clutter all the time, that's a relationship and behavioral challenge that relates to clutter. and then the structural components, which I think is definitely something that you and I have both discussed, that the conditions that we live within in cities and communities that create environments that make it difficult for people to manage what's around them. So those were the tenets that I was trying to bring in from public health as I worked on the book.
I love that. And how did that because the work in your business came before the book.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
How did you start decluttering homes? Let's start there.
Well, the first home that I worked on decluttering was in Swaziland, which was where I was living in 2008. For several years, I lived in Southern Africa for a long time, working on HIV/AIDS and women's health programs. And around 2009, I had a colleague who was getting ready to move. And she was feeling really concerned about the volume of stuff that she'd accumulated and how she was going to be able to fit it in her shipment back home. And I said, well, I think I could help you. And, let me come over for the weekend and work with you on that. And I did. And through that process, I realized, a lot of what was preventing her from letting go of things and packing were the stories that were attached to the things in her home, and how she needed to talk about them and how I could be there to support her working on that. So after a few years there, I moved to DC in 2011 and kind of kept working in my traditional public health jobs, really growing increasingly unhappy as I moved through the ladder of different jobs until I found myself in 2016 in a really difficult situation professionally and personally. And I was just like waiting for something different. And there was Marie Kondo with her first consultant training program on becoming a professional organizer. And I had read her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, and I'd loved it. And I thought, oh, let me get trained by this woman. And I did, and started my business from there.
And you were one of her first consultants, right?
Yes,
Trained.
I was in her very first training program, the first person in DC. And thankfully now there's hundreds of us, around the world. And I think that really goes to show that there's been a demand for compassionate, integrative, like help with this type of work everywhere. Yeah.
And there's no shame. I mean, I think, for those of you who don't know, this is how I sort of became the Afro minimalist. I looked online, I found myself on Pinterest, and that was all the advice that was there really at the time before Marie Kondo's book came out. And it was like you can only have 100 things, then the color palettes were all neutral. And I ended up having this all white, barren house. And it was the worst feeling in the world. And I was like, I'm just gonna have to be the Afro minimalist. I need color, I need texture, I can't do it. And turns out lots of people love color and texture, right? And so that is how we started this conversation around the practice of minimalism versus the aesthetics of minimalism. And I think there's a difference though between minimalism and decluttering, right? And so I'd love for you to kind of expand on that a little bit because, throughout the book, you weave stories of your clients, which I think is so beautiful because what happens when we share our stories is that our stories are powerful. And you think, I'm the only one. Cannot tell you how many people were like, oh my God, I'm a former attorney and I too had to get rid of my stuff. And I too love color and texture. And I'm like, oh, I thought that was my unique story, but it's not, right? And so let's talk a little bit though about that, the difference between minimalism and decluttering and sharing our stories and the power of that and in terms of it being very empowering for other people, not just for ourselves.
To me, minimalism has always seemed like it was a goal in and of itself. And I didn't see that as a goal from where I lived. And certainly it hasn't been for the people who I've worked with. Decluttering is a practice and it's a habit and it's something that you do to reach sort of better living and improve well-being. And so that's how that's been a lot of a distinction for me. And I think just as you say, that can be kind of stark and difficult to comprehend. And that is part of the reason why I wanted to put in all the stories in the book that because I've spent now several thousand hours with people in their homes working on projects. And the more I hear those stories and what is resonating and difficult for people, I'm hearing the same themes over and over. Yet each person thinks that their situation is the worst, can't be solved. They feel terrible about themselves. And I just kind of wanted to say, you're not alone.
You're really not.
Many people struggle with these things. And I think there's so much in media and in general and sort of larger conversations that put people down if they're not designing a home that's fit for public consumption or for social media, and it can be so different. And so what I tried to do with the stories was to include some of my own, frankly, to make sure that the readers could know that I don't view myself as outside of this situation. I'm very much a part of it. And then the stories that are included are composites or individual stories, obviously with identifying details change, of really powerful moments that I had with people that are meant to invoke a feeling that hopefully will inspire people to treat their spaces differently.
I think too, what I love about the stories is that they show it's a process,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
I think online and television, it looks like it happens in a weekend. Let me tell y'all,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's nothing you're decluttering in a weekend,
Mhm.
not long term, as far as I'm concerned,
No.
right? It's a process. And I think, I mean, I thought I could do it in a weekend. I was like, I'm gonna do weekend warrior, and and next thing you know, I just have piles everywhere, and I'm crying, and I'm overwhelmed, And so, I think that's the other part about the stories is it shows that it's a process, and it shows that there's no shame in asking for help, right? I mean, decluttering, again, when we move away from the aesthetics of all of this, decluttering it's tough, right? We have emotional attachments to things. We talk about the psychology of ownership with
Mhm,
our folks, for you with your clients, for
mhm.
me with readers, and you understand that a lot of our clutter is so much deeper than just the things that we buy. There's a reason behind that,
Yes.
right? We
Mhm.
talk about the power of touch. I did not know the power of touch, right? And the idea that when we touch something, partial ownership forms. And that's biological and psychological. It's just a fact, right? It's why you can give a kid a roll of toilet tissue and they're holding it for 5 minutes. And then you're like, okay, put it back. And they're like, it's mine. Like that's how we are
Yeah.
with certain things,
Mhm.
and so I had to learn to stop touching things. I had to learn to look at things and figure out like what's the emotional and psychological attachment behind that. Why
Mhm.
can't I let it go? And one of the things that you do in the book that I think is very powerful is you provide
Yeah.
activities.
Mhm.
Y'all, had I had activities,
Yeah.
it would have helped me so much
Oh,
because
yeah.
again, it
Mhm.
is a practice. So can you share a little bit about, why you included the activities, maybe give readers and listeners just a little snippet of what they can expect. I love the meditation
Oh,
that's in the
good,
back, but
good.
I'll let you share.
Oh, thank you. What you just said about trying to interrupt that power of touch is one of the main reasons why I wanted to include different activities in the book. And what I have is a series of, there's about 15. It's a mix of writing prompts, creativity exercises, meditations, communication scripts, and they're meant to encourage a pause in the process because sometimes with traditional decluttering language, we hear just go and do this thing, do this work. And the problem is you do it and you're not thinking and you're not feeling and you're not internalizing the importance of what's happening in this transformation that you're making. And so the activities are meant to provide a space for the pause and to encourage you to think a little differently. And I think I say in the book too, like these might seem a little weird, you might not want to do it, but I'd like you to sit with that and think about, why does it feel awkward to write about your feelings with memorabilia that you
Yeah.
have? And maybe read the book and come back and do them at another point,
Yeah.
and see if you experience your decluttering process differently.
I love that it allows readers to tap into the motivations behind why we buy and have certain things and
Mhm.
also the emotions,
Mhm.
right? Like no one talked about that before, right? And so I remember just thinking, "Oh, I'm going to get rid of everything." And next
Mhm.
thing you know, I'm sobbing, right?
Yes.
I'm thinking, "Look at how much money I wasted. Like,
Mhm.
why do I even have this? What are, and like we have to get to the deep psychological and emotional parts of it, right? And I think that's the holistic approach to decluttering
Mhm.
that you provide. Uh, I want to ask, and this is selfish because I'm a writer. What was the writing process like for you? And I'm asking that because it kind of forces you to reflect on your own journey, from working to starting the business, right? And then also, it really happened during the pandemic, didn't it? Like you were writing a lot during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And so just kind of wondering, like, what did that sort of awaken for you? What was this writing process like?
So at the beginning of the stay-at-home orders for the COVID pandemic, I was working on my business and also working at the State Department on the global HIV program that I worked on for many years. I'd like to say I worked part-time in both places, but I think I just worked full-time in both jobs and, was certainly stressing myself out. But I say that because at the start of that, I wrote an article. And it was an article on the connection between Marie Kondo's lessons around decluttering and the public health sort of practices around preventing the spread of COVID. And that really kind of triggered something about me. I was like, oh, wait, I can connect these dots. And so I started writing a little bit more, and I was enjoying sort of what was coming up, but it was like just this other thing I was doing while I was figuring out which of these other, my business or the State Department job I should be spending all my time doing. And that morphed over the years into the last 2 years when I've been really focused on this book in particular. And it's been transformative. I think I went through another professional change in my life, like I did when I sort of moved from public health into decluttering and professional organizing. And now I accept myself as, a writer as well too. And that's a big emotional upheaval to go through. So the tangible writing of the book was difficult. And I struggled to figure out how it fit within the other work that I was doing. I should say, like the paid labor versus the unpaid labor of writing a book. I also really missed working with other people during the part of the writer. I didn't, the isolation of writing on my own was difficult for me. And so at a certain point, I learned about developmental editors and brought one on named Allie. She's wonderful. And that created a lot more support for me in that structure. So that really helped me sort of enjoy the writing process more, because excavating the stories for myself and my client hours were very difficult in trying to like do them all justice on the page. So thank you to my therapist also, who was helpful in that. And I think it takes a lot to sort of get something on paper like this.
It does. It takes more work than folks know.
Yeah.
And to that end, I'd love to have you read a little bit before I ask a few more questions.
Sure. Thank you.
So I like to ask folks to read their favorite part of the book, or one of their favorite parts. We love the whole book, right? But something that you think would resonate with folks and give them a little flavor for Decluttered.
Okay, great. Well, this is the story that starts off the health chapter that I enjoy. So I'm going to read this. Sarah's breathing was rapid, almost keeping pace with her wringing hands. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding lingering too long on any one spot against the walls, where the problems were piling up. Literally, a dozen or so tubs of paper were stacked floor to ceiling against the wall. These tubs she had lugged from apartment to apartment, year after year, were no longer just extra objects to carry up and down stairs. The thousands of notes, bills, and printed out emails inside them stacked up and over the edges like waves of guilt hurling themselves at her. Why now? I asked myself. Why me? I thought. Sarah had invited me in to hold her hand and guide her, to nudge her from behind and pull her gently ahead on the path of decisions already made. I was a stranger, save just one call before our meeting, with only a website and a soothing phone voice to convince her that I could help her solve years' worth of concerns. Walking through her apartment, her brow was furrowed, while I made sure to stay relaxed and open, positive enough for the both of us. I breathed calmly until she could match my rhythm. This last move to DC had brought her enough chutzpah, hope, and promise that she wanted to seize that energy and address whatever the extra large containers taking up her floor space and stacked high within her closets contained. She wanted to be rid of the anxiety attacks that popped up each time she thought about what might be lurking within the tubs. Her eyes looked at me. What happens now? To deal with our fears, we must tread lightly at first. Just the next best step, I thought to myself as I reached for the tub closest to me. It had a blue lid, slightly battered from being shoved into trunks and stuffed under beds for years. Let's just start here, I smiled. One envelope after another, we waded through the papers inside. We sorted stacks of bills by ailment or issue, which pieced together a story of medical gaslighting throughout her 20s. Overdue bills that had eventually been paid were bundled together. There was shame held there with worn rubber bands and short emails with long handwritten notes from doctor's visits that yielded incomplete test results. It was all here. It was all around us, in tub after tub. We sorted by type and looked for relief. The answers to inconclusive medical tests from a decade earlier had eventually been found, and the invoices finally settled. Phew! She could shred these now. This chapter of Sarah's life had weighed on her for so long that it seemed surprising to her she could be free of it. The corners of her lips curled upwards along with a rising pile of empty bins. She had collected nearly 2 decades of bank statements and every financial notice she had ever received because she had experienced health and credit problems at one point, which then grew into lifelong shame around money. She kept every statement in case a creditor called, even though she had worked hard for years to pay back all her debts and loans. Sarah viewed the paperwork warily, and when I found one form indicating that a loan had been fully paid, I suggested we should hold it up. Let's celebrate this. You worked so hard, I said. This mountain of account statements did not define her, and her decluttered future was just beginning. Being able to voice the narrative of this part of her life and see on the papers that she had found resolution gave Sarah the confidence to start shredding item after item. As the recycling bags filled up with paper confetti, Sarah regained her floor space and some confidence that had been hiding in those tubs for much too long.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
You know, that story hit me in the gut. As a writer, I had stacks and stacks and stacks of drafts. And again, it's hoarding in a different way, right? It's hoarding words. Maybe I'll go back and need them someday. Maybe I'm not,
No.
you know. But when I read that, it made me think about the conversations that we have around inherited clutter, right? And one of the things that motivated me to go through that stack, and I'm sharing this story because it's interesting what motivates us to, do the thing that we know that we need to do. And I thought, man, if something happened to me, my daughter would think all of these drafts were important.
Yes.
She couldn't get rid of these. Mommy wrote these. You know what I mean? And so I didn't want her to inherit that clutter, right? And I think so many of those stories that you sort of weave throughout the book to sort of pinpoint and show and reflect our own lives, like even though for me it wasn't medical bills, I remember the stacks of papers, and then I love that you also provide solutions, right? Oftentimes what happens is we go through the decluttering, we shred all the papers, and then there's more papers, right? And so providing solutions and saying, and we've done some of this online too. We've talked about, well, now I wait until it's the final. You put final dash final dash final. Then I'll print that version, right? To edit as opposed to the first draft, the second draft, the third draft, right? We talked about doing e-writing, right? Like having e-notebooks, right? I think it's really important to sort of talk through solutions. And so I love that you share those throughout the book and also those stories of triumph, what are some of the ways that your clients are just elated, I would say, to have your support? Because I imagine they start with a lot of trepidation, a lot of shame, as you mentioned. Again, it's so important to talk about those emotions around it. They're normal. So we have to normalize that. But what are some of, like this success story, what are some of the stories that you remember of just your clients being elated and saying like, I cannot believe I did this.
Mhm.
I got through this.
I love when someone will text me after we've worked together for a little bit with whatever their personal win is. And it can be something like, oh my gosh, I got packed for my work trip in only 15 minutes. And usually it takes me hours. Or I found my passport, because we've gone through all your bins. Or I had one client several years ago, and she had lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, but her dream was to live on a boat. And so we, worked on all of the decluttering all the categories in her home. And then a year later, she moved onto a boat. And I just thought, oh, now you get to have the environment you want to be in with the amount of stuff that was appropriate for that. And so I love hearing stories like that. And I think one of the interesting things about this type of work is it's so personal and different for everyone. And so that's why, and this is something, Marie Kondo taught me, is we really want to identify what's your vision of success. What are we reaching for you? Is it that boat or that easy packing job? And everyone gets to decide for themselves. And then, whether you're using this book or, a service of someone to help you get there, like there's many ways to reach that goal.
So I know folks want to know, are you taking on clients?
Oh, yes. I'm taking on clients. One of my colleagues who's here in the audience, Catherine, is taking clients, I'm sure. And I mean, being whether you're in DC or you're someone who's watching virtually, there are people who are available to help.
And they love it, y'all.
Yeah.
Like we dread it. They love it.
Yeah. Like I really like, and I love meeting new clients, and I've clients all over the place these days. And find someone who resonates with you. And you'll feel so much better getting started. Yeah.
Well, folks have so many questions around decluttering, so I definitely want to open it up for Q&A. But the last question that I'll ask is, what's one thing that you want folks to take away from this book?
I hope people take away that your clutter doesn't have to be your story, that we are all so much healthier and better and happier people when we don't let the stuff around us define us. And it's not a moral failing to have clutter. And I hope that people will take away from the book that there's a lot of ways to think through what's causing it and a lot of ways to address it.
Love that. So we're going to open it up for questions, for Q&A from the audience here, also folks online. I hear we have a really big online audience. And so, yeah, we'll open it up here. Folks first, anyone have any questions, thoughts, decluttering, excitement to share? Any questions online? Oh, we have one in the back. Yes. So the question is, where should people start? You do give a few suggestions in your book, but what would you say?
I think start with whatever's been nagging you the most, whether it's the thing that has piled up the most in your house, the books or the clothing, or the concern that's nagging you. I mean, like people who know their clutter problem is coming from someone they live with or a family member, like, we do have to start addressing that. And so start with where the biggest problem is. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to counter.
Okay.
I'm going to say start small. You know yourself, right? I mean, that's the other thing. And I do think the thing that is most overwhelming to you that you want to tackle, it is a great place to start.
Yeah.
If you are feeling completely overwhelmed and not knowing where to start, I always tell people to start with their spice cabinet. All those lumps and clumps in the jar, you know what I mean? And then it makes you like, you get through that and you're like, now I can tackle the coffee mugs.
Yeah.
that tend to multiply.
You do want to start with something that you're going to feel a little a jolt of positivity with. So if your spices bring you that, I mean, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Because you want to get a win so that you'll keep going.
Yeah. So 2 approaches. Go for it.
Yeah. Let us know.
Let us know. Or start really, really small with your spices.
Yeah.
How do you do when someone needs decluttering support and they also have mental health complications that perhaps they haven't begun to seek support for? Where do they begin?
Okay, I'm going to repeat that question for everyone. Where do you, or how do you get support for people who also have mental health challenges when it comes to decluttering? I also want to share, and we talked about this before about hoarding, right? I think oftentimes we think of hoarding as what we see on television, right? It's the newspapers packed to the ceiling. It's, you can barely move. There are 500 cats, whatever, right? Like we have a vision of hoarding, but the clinical definition of hoarding is holding on to anything for future use. That's the clinical definition, right? And so what sort of advice do you give folks that may be struggling with that mental health sort of aspect of it? And where should they start or where should they go?
I do try to make sure people know I am not a mental health practitioner. Klein, I think that that's an important distinction. But the discussions I have with people include many health conditions and mental health challenges. So I do always ask, or people offer if they're working with someone, a doctor, a therapist, a support group, and whatever type of treatment plan they're on, I want to be supportive to that. So if they're in guidance for, managing their ADHD, I want to support the strategies they're using, not try and counter something. So I think that's an important part of the distinction. With clients, as we're talking about things, if they imply that they might need more help, I encourage and support them doing that. I can't make appointments for someone, but I can make sure that their phone is organized or they know where the numbers are and have that be very accessible. So that's a real distinction, but I think it's really part of a treatment team. I mean, I very often get referrals from people who are therapists who know that they're helping their clients with one aspect of what they're dealing with, and I'm then there to support another aspect. And so I think that's great. I love when my clients schedule therapy for after we have a session, because they know we're going to really uncover and go through some perhaps emotional stuff, and then they get to have their therapist the next day.
Wish I met you before I went on I went through it,
Yeah.
So because so much of it starts in our childhood, and so, my shopping addiction really started in childhood, and it was going to the mall with my mom, as a kid, and it became a form of leisure and joy for me. And then I discover I'm addicted to the thrill of the hunt of, finding a bargain, right? But I think when I think about like mental health and just sort of, again, it's part of that holistic process, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be, ADHD or something like that, right? I do think that there are just some mental sort of blocks that we have or things that we need to address sometimes that are contributing to our clutter. And I love that you are able to help clients, sort of dig into that a little bit more and get into the psychology of why they have clutter.
Thanks. And I think the example you give too of the shopping trips that originated with your mom. I mean, what I know of you and your mom is that you're very tight and you love your mom a lot. And so needing to understand through your process that you can still love your mom and you can still do great stuff with her, and it doesn't have to involve the buying of it. That's, that inner work, and you've done that. And that's what we try and talk about with other people,
Yeah. As long as we don't touch stuff, me and mom are fine.
Yeah.
I've gotten really good at that. You said you had another question online?
Two questions that are kind of similar.
Okay.
How do you get your partner on board if they don't see the problem, and how can you convince your partner to join you when you're having positive conversations but nothing else?
It's so funny. I'm going to let you answer because this is certainly not my wheelhouse, but I love that the conversations are always like, my partner.
Mhm,
It's my
mhm,
partner.
mhm.
So if you
Yeah.
could dig in a little bit there.
Oh, this question about getting your partner on board comes up a lot. And like you intimated, Christine, I really go with we have to start with ourselves. We really need to take a deeper look at what do we have control over? What do we have attachment to, and focus on our work. And similarly, actually with children too, the best thing that other people can see is that you're comfortable in your process, that you're letting go of what you need to let go of, you're keeping and maintaining order with what you keep, and then you're thriving because you've created a declutter and organized space for what you own or are in control of. And then the other people come along.
It is a lot of lead by
Yes.
example. It's a
Yes.
lot of lead by example. I
Yes.
love that you brought in children because man, they watch everything. I had a reader of the Afro Minimalist Guide. Her daughter had a bunch of stuffed animals. But she, mom is going through decluttering the house, decluttering her closet. And her daughter, she goes into her room and she had separated all these stuffed animals that she wanted to donate versus the ones that she, wanted to keep, right? Like, I think oftentimes with children and maybe even partners, we think that they have attachments to things that they really don't.
Yeah.
They really, really don't, right?
Yeah.
And if you ever, and I'm speaking from example here, I remember giving my daughter a donation bag and saying, it's psychological. Sorry, Nala, if you're watching, but she was younger and I know her currency and her currency is caring for others. And I just said, Nala, there are so many children right here in our own community who don't have what you have. Can you go in your room and can you fill up this donation bag with things that you'd like to give them? And I closed the door and I hear her in there rummaging around. And that bag was full before I knew it. You know who had a problem? Not our Harry Potter sweatshirt, not our Princess Tiana, the things that I thought she had such an attachment to, she really didn't, and so I think that leading by example, whether it be a partner, whether it be a parent and child, allowing them to see how you are navigating and working through the space and working through letting go, I think is kind of the best example that we can give.
I think that's a wonderful point. And I have a section in the book about relationships and some scripts for working through with a partner how to talk about this. And it's modeled off of other couples communication techniques, very literally, because I do think that how we want to live in our environments has such an impact on our daily life, our well-being, the health and happiness of a partnership. And so I think it's good to talk about it and sort of figure out, can we be on the same page about this as opposed to being at war about who's leaving stuff where or not putting things up. So
yeah, you can also just buy the book and just kind of leave it out.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll read it.
Yeah. Well, I did write the book in part really thinking about people who are often my clients and also their partners, because I do want it to be an accessible book for people who are really on board with decluttering and people who are like, why does this matter? And so I hope that it does resonate with people wherever you are on the spectrum of being interested in decluttering.
Yeah, I love that you did that too. And I love the section you included about loss, because I think that's also something that, individually and collectively that we have to talk through and think through. So again, it's very holistic. I love it. Any other questions?
Per hour it was done by contract and then the number of sessions.
Someone is ready to sign up. The question
Mhm.
is, how does this work? How
Yeah.
do I hire a
Mhm.
professional declutterer? How much can I anticipate spending? Is it hourly? Is it contractual? That's the question that we have from online.
Very detailed question. So prices vary by region and by city. So I can't give you a set price because I don't know where you're calling from, and it doesn't matter even if you write it into the chat. There's a variety of price ranges. Most people who I know have a set number of hours that they traditionally work with clients, and then you'll get a price based off of that. So for me, I work in person 4-hour segments of time. So my pricing is based off of that. Other people do bigger collections of hours, and some people just do hourly rates. I will say, I don't, they asked a part of the question was about certification. I think that there are different questions you might want to ask as you're researching who's the best fit for you. And so having training, I do think is helpful, whether it's getting certified through a national body like NAPO or through a training program like the KonMari training program. You are then working with someone who has invested some time and education. Now, also helpful is, the type of experience that they've had and really your personal connection with someone. So I always say to someone when I'm on an intro call with them, if I'm not the best fit, I hope you find who is, for whatever reason. The best thing is if you can get some help, if you are reaching out and sort of starting that. And professional organizers that I know, most of us are like, offer other names if we don't think we're the right fit. I'm not a specialist in certain areas, so I refer people to colleagues who are specialists, and I want them to be hired as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that someone asked that question though, because I didn't know that. And I wondered like, would you have to look at all my stuff first and then like assess and, oh yeah, no, that's definitely going to be a lot of money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but it's
Yeah,
hourly.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
It depends per person, but
Okay.
generally some people will do visits before they quote you something.
That would be
I
me.
do know.
I'm going to check it out
Yes.
first. Do we have any other questions from our in-person audience before we turn back to the online audience? Yes.
Oh,
Oh,
Catherine, maybe if you want to write one with me, it'll happen sooner. I think for right now, we'll just concentrate on sharing this message. And honestly, I'm enjoying hearing from people about what they like about it, what resonates with people. And I hope that helps guide whatever I do next, whether it's another book or something else.
love that. Yes.
What is your perspective on saving children's artwork?
Yes, end of the school year. Have a lot of that coming up for people. I think that for whether it's kids artwork or adults work memorabilia, I think you want to spend some time thinking about how do you want to tell this story, this chapter of your life, and does that look like having an album? Does that, a tangible album? Does that look like having a photo album that you save on a computer? Whatever visually or emotionally resonates with you, you want to pick that and then make a practice and a schedule for how often you're going to contribute to that. The end of the school year is a great time to do it for kids. Are honestly, recently with people say, put all the artwork in the bin for the year, let it pile up. And then at the end of the year, you can do something like pick your 12 favorites or whatever for you feels like the right amount, but you want to give yourself a guardrail of time and volume. And so that's what you're looking for in any type of thing. But then you really do want to try and finish that project, whether it's the album or sending it off to one of these online services, things like that. Because if you don't do that, you'll never actually experience the joy of why you kept it all. And then you will wind up with 10 bins and suddenly your kiddo is about to graduate from high school and you haven't created anything with that. And you're like, why did I keep 10 bins worth of stuff?
Sorry, I'm giggling because my daughter's in college now. And I remember keeping every piece of paper. the first time she learned how to trace a letter. You know what I mean? Just
Uh-huh.
foolishness, right?
Mhm.
Foolishness in retrospect. At the time, it was important to me.
Yeah.
You know, and then I think looking through all of the stuff and just being like, what am I really going to use this for one day, right?
Mhm.
Now, in there were some beautiful pieces of artwork, right?
Mhm.
I kept one piece of pottery, which was like
Mhm.
the first piece of little pottery that she made.
Mhm.
But you can imagine the collection of pottery. And, you know, some of that stuff is bad. We love our kids, but let's just keep it, you know, keep it real here, right? And so I think for me, sort of the test became, is this something that I'm keeping in a bin, hidden in a dark corner somewhere that I'm never opening? Or is it something that's on display?
Mhm.
Is it artwork that I'm going to use in a calendar?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like and again, I love that you said, think through some of the services, because people have come up with some really creative ways to, you know, take hold of our memorabilia and actually make it useful. Jenny knows I'm a big fan of need, use, love.
Mhm.
Got to need it, use it, and love it.
Mhm.
Right. And so we had a lot of folks, I heard from a lot of folks who kept like concert t-shirts. Right. And we're just like, I can't get rid of any of these. Right. And then there's a service that like makes them into this patchwork blanket,
Yes. It's great.
and they like use it
Mhm.
in, you know, use it in their guest bedroom and all this kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And so there's a lot of really unique services out there. And so I would also encourage the parents who are struggling to
Mhm.
get rid of the artwork to sort of consider some of those, and also to know it will get much easier
Yeah.
as the children get older.
So true. So true. Mhm.
The book teaches you how to build systems to maintain the order once things are decluttered.
Does the book get into systems on how to maintain order and structure once the home has been decluttered or the space has been decluttered?
Why, yes, it does. And I give 2 case study examples in the home and the beyond section that walk through real life client examples that I adapted for the readers as to how you can set up systems for your home and also in a workplace for maintaining order and then keeping up with it. So I would definitely suggest that the commenter check those out. Mhm. Great.
Any other questions? No one wants to talk about their clutter? Yes, we have a brave volunteer. No, I'm kidding.
Thought it is more of a comment than anything else, but I'll just be curious, like what it makes you think of. And disclaimer, I haven't read it yet. I saw that advertisement. Live my alley. I'm gonna go. But hearing you talk, it's just made me think, like, why do I care so much about it? Like, why did I light up when I saw that? Like, this book here, friend, you know, I spent half my day cleaning my kitchen and like, anyway,
Mhm.
so like, what is it about, like, every day I'm tidying and decluttering and whatnot, and I'm like, I feel it is a like psychological drive, and like I need my space to reflect how I want to feel. And there's like a feedback loop there that I can't
Mhm.
quite put my finger on. So I'm just curious, like, what that makes you think of. It's almost, it made me, like, as you were talking, I was like, it's almost like building your closet. Like, I want to pick clothes that make me feel like that's my identity, or that's what I want to be. And then when I wear it, it's like, this is, so it's like that feedback loop too. And it's like, instead of the wardrobe, it's the house.
Yeah.
So yeah, just curious what that jumble.
Well, it makes me think of the parts of the book where I go into how our expectations on ourselves and our environments reflect internal validation versus external validation. And a lot of things come up for people about why we do anything. And here we're talking about clutter and tidying and organizing and things. And a lot of those messages come to us from what we see in the media, what we're taught from our families, and then we internalize expectations for ourselves about what we should be doing, how we should be managing a home. And sometimes that is at odds with deeper values that we have, or more open and honest feelings about what we want to be spending our time doing and stuff. And so I hope that when you do read it, that those sections offer you some ideas to think through, because, the book isn't meant to be prescriptive about like why you feel something, but it is meant to help you figure out what are the drives behind why you're doing something, and either being stressed out quite a bit by clutter, or whether or the maintenance of the home activity. So let me know. Yeah.
You're going to like the activities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna like the
Okay.
activities. And I
Mhm.
love that because it kind of forces you to, think a little bit more critically about why you're doing certain things. I know
Mhm.
I was reading one of the activities just
Yeah.
about nostalgia and
Yeah. Mhm.
and sometimes also it's ritual,
Mhm.
like I feel like I cannot write
Mhm.
unless I have made coffee that I'm not going to drink. I have cleared the desk,
Uh-huh.
like sometimes it's ritual
Yes.
too,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes it's, we feel overwhelmed in other parts of our
Mhm.
lives. And so the one thing I can do to make me feel in control is have a clean kitchen sink.
Yeah.
I know, girl. I know. I know.
Mhm.
I think we have time for one more question online.
I think
No.
we're good.
All
Yeah.
right.
I have
Yes.
Is there an extreme of sort of like, I'm obsessed with purging everything from my house. I don't want anything.
Yeah.
And my husband thinks it's too like extreme, like when things are gone, since I've thrown them away or donated them.
Mhm.
So I was just curious, like, how is there a line when I don't think it's successful from my perspective, but
Mhm.
often I'm processing things,
Yeah.
moving them out, donating them,
Mhm.
putting on our listserv,
Mhm.
buy nothing groups.
I love buy nothing.
Mhm.
But I find that sometimes it's like a gift can't even remain on my counter before the flowers still are blooming. I'm already
Mhm.
thinking
Mm.
they need to be moved, cleared. So I guess I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
Jenny, makes me think of our childhood,
Mhm.
right? And then
Mhm.
also like cultural and societal expectations
Mhm.
around like whatever community you grew up in, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I've heard from a lot of folks who've read the guide that if they grew up around a family of hoarders, that they're so not intentionally, right? But they're so afraid of also,
Mhm.
repeating that practice, or, they remember not being able to find something when they were a kid. And so like there's so many little things. And I think that's why this book is so important, because it does help you do that inner work to figure out, why is this my pattern and
Mhm.
an approach? What is my unique psychology of ownership
Mhm.
is what I like to call it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. I think that will help to get at why perhaps you have that behavior. And then I would sort of, the next step to me would be to think, do you like having that behavior? And do you, if it's a problem, I think you said for your husband that everything is going away, like, what does the discussion look like between you about what's the right amount of time for things to spend in the house, or volume of things? And if it's not causing a problem, hey, that's great. If it is something that maybe needs to be discussed and negotiated a little bit more, what would that look like? And would you still, could you feel okay if that needle got moved a little bit?
Yeah, it makes me think about the bubbles story.
Mm.
I think it's so important for partners and couples, and even parents with older children, adults who are caring for their adult parents,
Mhm.
to really sort of share those stories, right? One of my dear friends, her husband, every time he washed the dishes, would use an obscene amount of dish soap, bubbles everywhere,
Mhm.
and this annoyed her. I know, right? To no end. And I'm I'm a good friend. So I'm just listening to her and I'm like, he's washing the dishes. But, this is annoying to her. And so I hear about this bubble story all the time. And so one day I just ask, have you ever asked him why he used so much dish soap? Turns out he was raised by his grandmother, very, very poor in the South. They would only get dish soap from like the dollar store. And even then, he would have to use like 1 or 2 drops. There were never any bubbles. And he said, now that I'm older, he wants the
Mhm.
bubbles, so
Mhm.
sometimes it is so not what we think. And it's important to have those discussions. And I'm sure you see that a lot with your clients, the conversations that really spark that aha moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's always an interesting backstory. And then, the goal is to figure out like, okay, once we know that, how do we want to be? And what kind of support do we need to have to put the right system in place so everybody feels okay in a home?
Well, Jenny, I want to thank you not only for this book, but for being a dear friend, of course, and also being a professional declutterer because y'all, that just can't be for the faint of heart. Like I just can't imagine. And so thank you so much for the work that you do for so many folks here in DC. I personally know lives that you've changed, and thank you for this book, which now will allow your work and your approach to decluttering to be enjoyed and informed by the masses of folks. And so just thank you. It's a beautiful book. Everyone, Jenny Albertini, Decluttered. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine, Lainey.
Thank you all for being here this evening. We have copies of both Decluttered and the Afro Minimalist Guide upstairs that are available for purchase. If you will give us just a couple of minutes to reset the space, if you are willing and able to set your chair to the side so that we can bring out a table for our lovely authors to sit at, we will get that started shortly. And thank you all so much for being here. And folks online, hi, Mom.